WMI and CIM, using CIM commands to query data. Now in the previous nugget, we used the older Windows management instrumentation commands, and now we're going to switch over to doing more or less the same tasks, just using the newer Common Information Model commands. Now remember, CIM is only available in PowerShell version 3 and later, so if you're using older versions of PowerShell, you'll still want to stick with the WMI commands, and PowerShell version 3 and later has those WMI commands too. As much of your future investment as possible, though, should go with these CIM commands. These have the potential to be cross-platform, because rather than being built on preliminary standards and proprietary protocols, like WMI was, the CIM commands are built using finalized protocols and open industry standard procedures. Here's how we'll tackle this topic. We'll start with retrieving basic class and instance information. Again, this is really the same as we did in the previous nugget. We're just going to be using a new set of commands, and so the syntax is slightly different, and the procedures are a little bit different too. We'll look at some of those commands' different options as well, and we'll talk about how to work with the output. In fact, we'll do a little bit of compare and contrast and see if there are any differences in the output between the older WMI command and the newer CIM commands, just so you know if there's any potential gotchas. But throughout this, I need to emphasize that this is all remoting under the hood. In other words, these CIM commands are using that same WSMan protocol that we used when we talked about PowerShell remoting. So everything is kind of moving over to this protocol for management communications, and CIM is one of those things. So let me again emphasize, I'm going to be doing pretty much everything here in Windows 8 because this is where I have my PowerShell version 3 set up. And we're going to need PowerShell version 3 because that's where these new CIM commands were actually introduced. So let's just take a look and see what we're dealing with to start with. Get command, nouns starting with CIM. We've got a bunch of different things, and we're going to start by really just working with these first two, get CIM class and get CIM instance. And somehow I've allowed my font size to get a little small. I'm going to bump that up just a bit. Switch over to a font that I like better. There, that's nicer. So keep in mind the organization of the repository, whether you're using the WMI commands or the CIM commands, starts out at the namespace level. Within the namespace, you have class definitions. Now, those definitions are abstract. Just because you have a tape drive class doesn't mean you actually have a tape drive hooked up. So these classes define a potentially manageable object. When you actually have a manageable object, then you have an instance of the corresponding class. Now with the WMI commands, we didn't have a super straightforward way of just getting the class definition, so this get CIM class is kind of new. We did have a way of getting instances though, and that's what the get WMI object command did. So the equivalent of that now is get CIM instance. Let's start by taking a look at the get CIM class command. You can see you can give it a class name. Now that appears to be optional. The entire parameter is contained within square brackets. If you do give it a class name, you can only give it one though. You can specify a namespace, and I'm guessing, yeah, this is optional also because it's entirely contained in square brackets. I'm guessing that if you don't give it a namespace, that it'll default to root CIM v2. You can also give it a computer name. So let's just quickly try and do something here. Get CIM class, class name, Win32 BIOS, from the namespace root CIM v2. I realize that's probably the default, but just to keep the syntax really complete, I'm going to go ahead and put it in this time. Okay, that gives us some good information. Now, you can run into a situation like this with PowerShell sometimes. This CIM class methods and CIM class properties, these appear to be collections. So, meaning the property itself contains other objects, and I can tell because it's a comma-separated list enclosed inside a curly brackets. And oops, that's just how PowerShell visually represents that. So to try and make that a little bit easier to read, I'm going to pipe it to format list property all. Breaks it down just a little bit more for me. So I can see that the class I've retrieved is indeed Win32 BIOS. It inherits from a superclass, which is called CIM BIOS element. Now this is something that I pointed out in the previous nugget, but this actually makes it a little bit clearer. The CIM version of this class is kind of the vendor neutral generic version. The Win32 inherits from that and probably adds a few things to it to make it a more Windows specific implementation. You might see something similar on another operating system where it inherits from the generic class to produce one that's more specific to that OS. And so the superclass comes from root SIMv2. There's a number of properties, and it's still doing the three dot ellipses thing at the end. So let's do this. Let's pull out just those properties. Select, expand, sim class properties. And the reason it had to list those in curly brackets initially is because each of these things, let's see if I can get a little bit of everything on the screen, each of these, including caption, is its own object, which has its own properties. So this is telling me that I have a property called caption. It's a string. It's read-only. Let's see what else we've got. Description, that's also read-only. Install date, read-only. You're going to find a lot of read-only here in WMI and CIM, because they really are just designed to retrieve data. I'm scrolling through here quickly to see if there's anything that isn't read-only. Probably not, because most of your BIOS stuff is set in the BIOS. Yeah, all of it's read-only. Perfectly normal. So this is just giving me a little bit of information about the class. Some of this information is the same stuff that you would really find if you looked up the class online and found its documentation page. The difference here is that getSimClass isn't relying on there being a documentation page. I'm wondering what would happen. GetSimClass. Let's see, let's go for the namespace root security center. Look at that. One of the neat things about these sim commands is they have tab completion. I'm just hitting tab to get my namespace. One thing to keep in mind, it will only tab complete based on the information on your computer. So if you're trying to retrieve something from a remote computer and it's something that doesn't exist on your computer, then tab completion won't find it. So it's just doing this as a little shortcut for stuff that I need to work with locally. So namespace, and let's pull out a class. I wonder if this will tab complete too. Anti. Oh, awesome, it does. So I'm going to retrieve the definition for the anti-spyware product class from the root security center 2. The reason I'm doing this is one of those classes that isn't actually documented in the MSDN website. So I'm trying to learn a little bit more about it. Okay, well, we've got some good information there. Let's do a select, expand, sim, class, properties. This is giving me all the information about that. It's got a display name. Well, kind of doesn't say read-only, implies I might be able to change that. We'll have to play with that a little bit later. Path to the signed executable is a string. This is just kind of giving me a better breakdown of what these properties are and what kind of data they contain, so that if I'm choosing to work with instances of this class, I have a better idea of what I'm working with. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and get a SIM instance. I'm going to specify the namespace root security center 2, and the class name is anti-spyware product. So we get similar output here. Because I went against my local host, it appears that the PS computer name property is not going to be filled in. That's kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. Let's pipe this to select star, make sure we're getting all the properties. You'll notice that these sim commands do not tend to output the system properties that have a double underscore. In fact, they provide the same information. Here's the class, here's its instance properties, and so forth, but they don't provide them with those double underscore things. So sometimes that can just make the output a little nicer looking. This is good stuff. I'm curious though, I said one of the things I wanted to do was compare and contrast WMI and CIM. So let's do that. Get WMI object, namespace, root, oh, no tab completion, that's a bummer. Security center 2, class name, anti-spyware product, select star. So this time we've gotten all these system classes. Looks like we've basically got the same information. You know what, just to make this a little bit easier, here's what we'll do. I'll open up another window, and we'll kind of size them so I can fit them side by side, and we'll do a side-by-side comparison. Get WMI object, namespace, root, security center 2, class, whatever this, anti-spyware product. Quick thing to point out, the get WMI object command does use the -class parameter to specify the class name, whereas the get CIM instance uses -class name. So just a little bit of syntactical detail you'll have to get used to as you start to switch. So we still get display name, we still get the instance GUID, we get both the paths, we get the product state, the timestamp. Now this is filling in the PS computer name, and it's a little vexing. I wish this one was. Don't know if that's a bug or not. This is providing, we get the timestamp on both. So it looks like we're getting the same basic data. What we're not getting on the CIM side are these _system properties. But we, on the other hand, on the CIM side, do get some information about the CIM class and the properties that come with it. So the output is super duper similar, but a little bit different. So this is my CIM one again. I'm going to pipe it to get member. And here on the WMI side, instead, we're going to pipe it to get member. And these also, I'm going to try and line these up. There we go. These look real similar as well. We've got the names, similar. Here's a difference. You'll notice over here on the WMI side, I don't pick up all these methods. Now these methods are standardized methods that come with every single CIM object. Get the CIM session computer name, get the instance ID, get a hash code, get object data, but the basic properties here are the same. Now one thing we are missing that we got on the WMI side were these convert to and convert from date time methods. I noticed that PS computer name is not listed here, whereas over here it's an alias to the __ server. So perhaps that's why it wasn't being populated on the CIM side. I'm a little concerned about this convert to and convert from date time missing. So let's do this one. Get CIM instance, class name, Win32 operating system. And I hit tab. Oh, there, it just took it a second to go find that and complete it. And let's do a format list star. We'll do the same thing over here with WMI. Get WMI object, Win32 operating system, format list star. I wanted to look for that last boot up time property. We'll start over here on the WMI side. Here it is, last boot up time. Let's see where that lives over here. Last boot up time. See, here's a neat thing. On the WMI side, if you'll recall, these time and date values are this wacky thing. And that's why Microsoft had to add on those convert to date time and convert from date time. Well, we don't have those conversion methods over here on the CIM side, but that's because CIM provides its dates and times as dates and times. There's no need to convert. They're already being given to us in a readable format. That's really nice. Let's pipe this to get member. And also pipe this one to get member. Now over here, other than convert to date time and convert from date time, which I've realized I don't need anymore, this Win32 operating system class does have a few methods, things I can make it do. I can make the computer reboot, I can set its date time, I can shut it down, I can do a Win32 shutdown. I guess we'll have to explore that later. So let's see if the CIM provides access to those same things. It does not appear to. So that's something we're going to have to explore. And now in a couple of nuggets, we're going to be playing around with methods. And so we're going to have to figure out exactly what the deal is with those. But I want to take a look here. Let's make sure the type names are similar, and they're not even the same. You see the CIM command is producing an object of the type Microsoft.management.infrastructure.sim instance, and then it gives me the path to the actual instance, root simv2 Win32 operating system. It's a slightly different thing, system.management.management object. So that might be one of the reasons why the WMI side offers these methods out of the gate, but the CIM side doesn't. Now, don't worry, we're still going to have access to those methods. In fact, get sim class Win32 operating system. You'll notice that the methods are there. In fact, let's go take this window full width. I think I'm done with my side-by-side. Select, expand, sim class methods. So the methods are all defined as part of the class. That means we still have access to them. We just have to use them in a slightly different fashion. One of the reasons for that is that this is all happening over remoting. So let's do this. Go back to my WMI side for just a moment. Get WMI object, class Win32. We'll do operating system again, but this time I want to get it from a remote computer. We're going to let that run. And I'll do the same thing over here. Get sim instance, class name Win32 operating system from the computer DC. Now this is still running over here. Hopefully my firewalls are going to let that go through. I know that get sim instance though is using WSMan, which means it's remoting, and that's enabled by default on server 2012, which is what my DC is running. So it's able to get through right away. We've got some pretty good information here. The system directory, the build number, the registered user, the OS serial number, the version of it, the computer name that got populated. That's incredible. Well, that makes sense because I'm talking to a remote computer. Let's go ahead and pipe that to format list star. So we've got lots of information there. It's all populated. Everything we need to know about this is there. We'll pipe it to get member. Looks the same as when I queried it from my local computer, which is to be expected, and that includes not having any of the methods of this thing. So again, we're going to have to talk about slightly different techniques for using those methods. Over here, we finally did get some output. The default output doesn't include as much information, or at least it's not laid out in a nice pretty table. I guess it mostly is the same stuff, but on the sim side, they programmed it to show up as a table, which I like a little better. But we can certainly pipe that to format list star. Oh, and then wait again. See, it has to reestablish that connection every time with those RPCs. That's one of the reasons that the sim side can sometimes be a little bit more convenient. Oh, there it goes. So it looks like we're really retrieving the same information either way. It's just the sim side is going to make us work with our methods a little bit differently. Now, let's try this. I'm just curious because my Windows 7 computer, if you recall, only has PowerShell version 2. So let's see if I can do a get WMI class Win32 operating system from that computer. Now, it's a client computer and it's very likely going to have firewalls up, but let's see if I'm able to get through anyway. Yeah, no. The RPC server is unavailable. Well, now I have to go over to that computer and I have to configure the firewall for the remote administration exception, and what a pain. Let's see if this works. Get sim instance, class name, Win32 operating system from the computer Win7. Now that Windows 7 is a pretty fresh install, and that should mean that remoting is not enabled over there. So I'm expecting this to fail. Let's give it a second and see what happens. Okay, as expected, it failed because I don't have remoting enabled over there. That's fine. Let's switch over to that computer. And the reason I'm making you do all this or watch all this is because I want to really focus on the cross-version communication. Version 3 talking to version 3, it's fine. I really want to see what's going to be involved in managing a down-level client that doesn't have PowerShell version 3 installed. So the first thing I'll do, okay, I've opened the Network and Sharing Center. We'll get to that in a sec. Let's open PowerShell, make sure I'm running as administrator, and say enable PS remoting. I'm sure. Looks like everything works there. Let's just check it real quick. Enter PS session localhost. That's going to loop me back into my own computer, so that's working. Great. Now we'll switch back to Windows 8. And we'll repeat the same tests. I didn't do anything to the firewall, and WMI has nothing to do with remoting, so I'm expecting the exact same result over here. I'm going to let that run for a sec. Now, I just got through telling you that all these CIM commands communicate over remoting. So does that mean that simply enabling remoting will make the CIM command work? Well, let's run that again also and find out. We'll see who times out the first as well, or produces results. Make these a little smaller again. Oh, so WMI already failed, which I expected. Now look, this is interesting. CIM failed also. The original failure when remoting wasn't enabled is that WinRM couldn't complete the operation, meaning I can't even talk to the remote computer. Look, make sure it's turned on. Make sure there's a firewall exception for the WinRM service. Make sure that firewall exception is all legit. The second time, after I enabled remoting, it's a little bit different. What it's saying here is, hey, I was able to talk to the computer, but I couldn't process the request. The Distributed Management Task Force, DMTF resource URI, was used to access a non-DMTF class. So here's the deal. The CIM stuff really only truly exists in PowerShell version 3 and later. It communicates over the remoting protocol, but simply having the protocol set up is not sufficient to make it work on an older computer. PowerShell version 2 can talk remoting, but it does not understand this incoming CIM request because PowerShell version 2 doesn't include CIM. All right, let's hop back over to Windows 7. I want to see if I can enable the firewall exception that will at least get WMI working. So firewall, allow a program or feature, and let's see if I can find the remote service management. We should just turn all these things on. Remote everything. I don't need Windows Fire. Here we go. Windows Management Instrumentation. Okay, let's hit OK. And now we'll go back to Windows 8 and see if that solved it. Now that is obviously not going to make CIM work. CIM will never work on that computer unless I install PowerShell version 3. But let's see if this works. Oh, it did, and it worked fairly quickly. So that's how this cross-version stuff is going to work. If you're using CIM, you are limited to talking to machines that have PowerShell 3 or later installed. If you need to talk to older machines, you still have to use the get WMI object command, or do you? In fact, CIM is capable of emulating the old protocol. So you can get rid of the WMI commands from your mental inventory completely. In order to have the CIM commands talk to a down-level machine, there's another step you have to take. You have to create a CIM session, and that's something we're going to cover in an upcoming nugget, just a couple from now, in fact. So we'll get to that then. Right now, I want to look at some of the other options for these commands we've been working with, primarily get CIM instance. You can specify a class name, a computer name. We'll talk about filtering in just a moment. In fact, it'll be the next nugget that we cover because that's a very important concept, both for CIM and for WMI. We've specified a namespace. It says here I can retrieve just specified properties, and that might actually make things go quicker. Let's try that. Get CIM instance from the computer name DC. Let's grab the class Win32 BIOS, and I only want to grab the serial number property. So interesting. Here's what happens when I did that. I still got back the entire BIOS object, but now the only property that actually got filled in was the one I asked for. So be a little bit cautious with that. You got to be aware that when you ask for an instance, you're going to get the entire instance structure, but it might not fill in every property if that's what you asked for. So this is all good stuff. We're going to continue to play with the CIM commands a lot more because their flexibility expands when we start talking about things like filtering and associations and the ability to work across sessions, all of which is coming right up. So now you know how to use the CIM commands as well as their older WMI counterparts. I showed you how to get class information, retrieve instances, and how to work with some of the major options of those commands. We also looked at working with the output of those commands and kind of contrasted them with the output of the WMI equivalents, talked about some of the differences. Just keep in mind that under the hood, it's all that WS-MAN protocol, the same thing we used for remoting. Microsoft is rapidly trying to move, well, not rapidly, but as rapidly as they go, they're trying to move everything over to that protocol and away from older proprietary protocols like remote procedure calls. So as you start moving over to CIM, one of the things you'll have to do is rethink how you set up the firewalls between you and the machines you manage, because they're going to need to talk over this new protocol instead of the older RPC protocol. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.